Is on? Okay. Привет. That's the only word I know, so don't be mistaken by my name, Dimitri. I'm actually from Berlin. There we have BigchainDB. And the talk of today is about trusted data for unstoppable code. So we're a database blockchain. It's all about the data. Now, what kind of data? Here I categorized a few assets, but mainly the topics, like, for example, identity, any kind of exchangeable asset, any kind of intellectual property, any kind of physical world representation. It's all valuable. It's all something we want to store and maybe monetize upon. But there are a few problems here. First of all, let's talk about identity. There's a lot of nice social networks you want to use. And typically they ask you, can you bring all your private data and put it in our servers? And you say, whoa, this service is free, it's awesome, I'll do it. But at that point, you're not using the service, you're actually the product getting sold to advertisement companies. Very similar problem that we see is that how is your data managed? Your private secrets, are they stored somewhere in an untrusted server? I think people have about 150 accounts. Maybe the leakiest server will leak your credentials, your very secret information. Now, it all boils down to that your private, your personal data is stored in somebody else's database, somebody else's data silo. You have to ask permission to use it. It's kind of weird, no? We want to own and control our own data because it's ours. Talking about intellectual property, there's a few things that can happen on the web. You have something cool and awesome, and maybe you made a new meme or image or a video or a music, you put it out there and it gets linked forward. It's very difficult to trace back the exact origin of the content creator. There's no attribution. And also, yeah, just talking about blockchains, it also includes middlemen. In the creative sector, the middleman takes the biggest chunk of the pie. I think here, this chart shows you if you buy a song, how much flows back to the creators. It's about 13%, it's maybe 10% at most. It's scandalous. Everything in the real world is kind of weird as well, because if you go on eBay, you buy something, you maybe check some credentials, but you buy first and then you get delivery. So basically you pay and then you pray. Pray that it actually arrives at the right location in the right condition. So this guy is not too happy about it. What we can also try to see is what's the transparency in the supply chain. If some product gets delivered, where has it been built? Where did the raw materials came from? In what ethical conditions were they created? What's the ecological footprint? If we have something else than private data silos, then we might change this paradigm. So let's look at how currently a typical application stack works. At the top, you have your nice application typically running in a browser. Below that, you might have some platform running your server. And below that, you have your business logic. Business logic executes code based on data. Where does that data come from? Well, two sorts. There's big blobs. You would store like big files, PDFs, whatever. You would store in S3 file systems. And then you have your queryable structured data, which you store in a database. And the layer below is the hardware driving all of this. Now, Bitcoin happened somewhere 2008, 2009. I started developing on Bitcoin in about 2013. And I wanted to use it as a color coin for intellectual property. Basically, give away licenses like you give away tokens. And that product was called Ascribe. It's still up and running, by the way. But for me, it was really difficult to use a Bitcoin blockchain as a database because I wanted to know which coin corresponded to which intellectual property, which would point to a file somewhere on Amazon S3 or whatever. It was very clumsy to use. It's not really a database. What it actually is a token store. It's something where you store your eCash, eGold, all of these things. Now, the landscape has evolved. We're 2017, decentralization happens on every single layer here. We have dApps on the top, but we also have platforms that allow you to roll out your own blockchain. The business logic, which used to be EC2 and Azure is now smart contracts, albeit in a public setting or private setting, but they're processing business in an unstoppable way. You have to basically span the entire network to slow it down or take down the entire network to make it stop executing. So unstoppable code. Now, a very important layer is what is this code computing upon? Well, maybe some files, giving access rights to files. Then we have IPFS, Interplanetary File System, maybe Swarm from Ethereum. And of course, we have a lot of altcoins, new tokens, interbank payment stuff, zero cash for privacy. And what we're focusing on is the database. So we try to decentralize data, have people give them access to their private data, the control over their private data. Nevertheless, much of this data might come out of a secure hardware layer provisioned by IOTA, Riddle and Code, and these are all hardware solutions that are blockchain enabled. Now, what's BigchainDB exactly? Well, we started off as a big data database and then added a decentralization layer on top of that. So this means a few things. It means immutability. We store it in form of transactions that are linked to each other with hashes. So very, very difficult to basically fraud upon the history. Decentralized control, taking away a single admin and make it a plural admin in a consortia. And native assets. Every transaction needs to be signed upon. There is logic to basically switch ownership of assets, all of these things. Things you would expect from a blockchain. But on top of that, we actually use the power of big data. So we have scalability, sharding, but also queryability, a very standardized, SQLized language to query your assets. And operationalized means that it's very easy to use. You just do BigchainDB up, and it's up. It's running, installing, and connecting to the network. These are kind of the things I just mentioned, so I'll skip that. We work as a consortium database currently. Our next release will be a mixed public-private. I can talk about that later offline, but currently it's a consortium database. And at the core is either MongoDB or RethinkDB. Now, you don't need to host your own BigchainDB node. You can use IPDB or the interplanetary database that's using BigchainDB technology, but it's hosted by a set of caretakers like Internet Archive, Dyn.org. There's like 20 of them, and they gather around in a foundation and they host nodes of BigchainDB in a governance layer that's called IPDB. So you can just go to test.ipdb.net, and then you have an API out of the box. You have a database served for you. We support a lot of drivers, Python, JavaScript, Java, even command line interface, Ruby, Haskell, Go, you name it. Some of them come out of the community, some of them we support ourselves. And we have a lot of boilerplate for React, Angular. There is even an intellectual property protocol. There is a payment protocol, all of these things out of the box compliant to BigchainDB. So you can just go to our GitHub. It's all open source. It's all there, and just use it. Of course, documentation and tutorials available. And we invest a lot of time in community outreach, making sure that we understand what they actually want, making sure that we build tools for the community. Now, what are they building? First of all, well, we build Ascribe, which is licensing and intellectual property on the blockchain. On top of that, we also build Where on the Net, where you can basically scrape the entire web and look where is my image occurring, a bit like Google image search, but then on a timeline. You can see what happened with my file, where did it occur from 2009 till now. We are part of a decentralized identity foundation where we look about self-sovereign identity. People owning and control their own private data, and that you can inject into apps. Instead of having apps hosting your data, you're basically injecting your private personal data into these apps. So that's quite neat. And we're also working around machine identity, chips with identity. There's a few companies, like for example, BenBen doing land registry on top of BigchainDB. We integrate with Estonia. And we do a lot about supply chain, because supply chain is all about data and how to manage data between the different stakeholders. So one of them is including a tag inside of clothes with NFC. You scan it and you can see where the raw materials came from, how they got processed, and etc. Digital twins. So we hook up into BMWs and TomToms, and they report where they have been for fleet management, and essentially reporting where is my car, how was it used, odometer fraud getting detected because you have constant reporting of your kilometry. And finally, it's all about the data. Data is the new oil. So we created the data exchange together with Toyota Research Institute, which is all about autonomous vehicle driving, sharing that data for machine learning models. And we took it one step further, and we recently announced the Ocean, which is basically a protocol to connect data lakes. It's a data exchange. It's all about monetizing data, bringing data silos to data scientists, and vice versa. So that's about it. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, a good moment, no?